signing in. Welcome to the webinar this afternoon, co-hosted with go2HR, BC Hotel Association, and Able BC. I know it's the top of the hour here. We will just take another couple of minutes while we're seeing quite a few people still signing in, and then we will proceed. For those of you that are already on the call, we'll just let you know that this webinar is being recorded and it will be available for you afterwards if you'd like to share it with others. And we will also distribute it through our communiques, and it will be hosted on our website. So certainly our intention is for anyone that would benefit from seeing the webinar this afternoon, or if anybody has any questions regarding it, that we are still here and available to assist. So we'll just give it another minute or two. I see we're at 2 minutes after the hour, and we'll just give it another minute before we start. I see we still have a few people that are signing in. So we'll just give everybody another minute and then we'll start, and people can just jump in as they're able. Okay, it's now 4 minutes after the hour, and I think it's appropriate that we start, just respecting everybody's time, and those people that sign in a little bit later can catch up or review the webinar afterwards. So I'd like to first of all introduce myself. I'm Ingrid Jarrett, President and CEO of the BC Hotel Association. I'd like to also introduce Mike McLeod, our Director of Members and Business Development. We're very pleased today to be co-hosting this webinar for our industry during this really challenging time, in partnership with go2HR, and great partners are Krista and Arun, and then also our partnership with Able BC, and Jeff as the Executive Director of Able BC. And we know that we have members and industry for all three of our associations, and really looking at the importance of the topic today. We've been very pleased with the amount of people that have signed up and participated. Just a little bit of housekeeping for you. This webinar is being recorded and will be available after the webinar. We do have a presentation for you for about 45 minutes, and then we have about 15 minutes for a Q&A. And that question and answer period will enable anything that we haven't answered during the presentation. There is a chat function that you can access at the bottom of your screen. You can pop a question in there, and then I'll read them out, and just whoever is most appropriate to answer it, I'll ask them to do so. Should there be questions that we're not able to address during the webinar, we are here to support you and make sure that we find the answers for you. So at the end of the webinar, we have a slide with our contact information. So next slide, please, Phil. Thank you so much. Krista, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ingrid, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for all joining us here today. My name is Krista Bax, and I'm the CEO at go2HR. I'm very pleased to be here hosting this webinar with our partners, BCHA and Able BC. So just at a high level, go2HR is the HR association for BC's tourism and hospitality industry. And we've been around in some form of another for the last 40 years. And more recently, in the last 10 plus, we've been in partnership with WorkSafe BC as the Health and Safety Association for the industry as well. So, under this dual mandate, we do a number of things. We support employers with their HR needs, such as recruitment, retention, and understanding the labor market. We provide industry training such as our popular Superhost customer service training suite and Food Safe. We lead various industry career awareness initiatives and offer industry and job seekers tools such as our highly used job board. And finally, why we're here today is, we work with employers to ensure health and safety in their operations and in all their businesses. So throughout this pandemic, we've been working with our members to help the industry respond and recover from this pandemic, because it has had devastating effects throughout every community here in BC. And we all find ourselves and our businesses in a very challenging space, with new dynamic safety protocols, fragile, polarized social environments, and varied positions regarding COVID's risks and impacts. Conflict in the workplace between workers and guests is increasing, and we hope today's webinar will equip you with some knowledge to be able to handle these situations more effectively, maintaining everyone's safety. So thank you, Ingrid, and back to you.
Now, just as a sort of putting a frame around the current circumstance we operate in, and thank you, Krista, certainly, you referred to some of those changes and those things that we're actually having to deal with now on a daily basis as an industry that is very people focused, and the pride of service excellence and hospitality and the will to serve, that's the foundation of why we choose this as a career path. And when we take a look at the key pieces that's changed that are of critical importance, the first is communications, pre-arrival. So whether you're a restaurant, a pub, a hotel, it is very important that your way of operating is communicated to set the expectation for your team and for your guests, whether that is a meeting or a hotel guest or somebody coming to dine in your restaurant or coming to your pub. Critical importance, again, health and safety plan, that it's been developed in partnership with your team, that your team understands it. They know that it has their health and safety first and foremost, as well as guests. And that really dovetails into the education training that is required to ensure that your team is confident that they in fact have the tools that they need to operate in the best way possible during this pandemic. Our guests today and our employees, in some cases, there's some uncertainty, and there's a heightened degree of stress when there comes to uncertainty. The most important thing that we can do is to be confident that we know what we're doing, how we're doing it, why we're doing it, and that we in fact are able to continue to operate in our industry the best way possible and to keep everybody safe. But to suggest that there isn't stress, uncertainty, and a bit of anxiety in the workplace today, coming from all different areas, I think it's important that we do acknowledge that, which is why also this webinar today is, I think, so valid for so many people. Everybody has a different comfort level. Everybody has a different sort of thinking around the pandemic and to what degree of safety and security. So all of those things today are part of the reason, again, for the webinar. The best practices and protocols and most up-to-date information is housed on our website. And that is the link there. And so as the Department of Health updates those best practices or the guidelines, they in fact are there. And then so are the Q&As, which is the most often asked questions, so that you know that you're operating in adhering to the standards. You know, we all need to work together to deliver service excellence. And our commitment to service excellence has not changed due to the pandemic. We just have to do it in a slightly different way. And accommodations, food and beverage, we've all been doing our part to look after our communities, each other, and ourselves. And our due care and our self-responsibility, as well as our responsibility to hold others to account in a very public-saving industry, is a key part of why we believe the information being provided to you today will be helpful. Next slide, please, Phil. Over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ingrid, and I appreciate the opportunity of sharing some ideas and concepts with you and your audience here today. Your introduction was spot on, because we're talking today about the importance of providing that service to clients and customers in a safe environment, and I've hopefully going to share some ideas with you today that will resonate and make sense. My name is Phil Eastwood. I run a company called Fury Group Training, but professionally, I was a police officer for 35 years, 27 of that with the New Westminster Police Department, and 8 serving in the London Metropolitan Police in an area of West London called Notting Hill. So if you ever saw the movie with Hugh Grant and Julia Roberts, that's where I grew up on. And safety has been a top priority of mine throughout my professional career. And on the side of my career, there was this interest in providing training and consulting information in a way that now that I'm sort of post-policing, I think would be relevant here to share with you some of those ideas. So that's what we specialize in. We specialize in workplace violence prevention training. And one of the things that we can do here today is just to share you some of those sort of high-level ideas and provide you with some tools. So that's what we're going to be doing. Ingrid talked about the duty of care that organizations and you as employers have to your staff and your clients and customers coming into your establishments. That's massively important to understand. There is a legal responsibility that you have, that when people walk in the door, whether they be employees at any level of the organization or customers and clients, that it's a safe environment. And there are definitely things that you can do to ensure that you're not only meeting the compliant level, but you're far exceeding it, because that's obviously what you're looking to do. You're looking to be not just meeting the requirements, but obviously exceeding them. There are 5 myths that are within the world around workplace violence. This is legislatively mandated in Canada and has been, the last province I think to come on board was Ontario in 2010. But in British Columbia here, we've had legislation, legal regulations from the Workers' Compensation Board and now WorkSafe BC since 1998. But there are still myths out there regarding workplace violence, and some of them are here. People may feel that someone else's job to prevent it. So someone thinks that, oh, it's not my responsibility as an employee, as a supervisor, as a manager. It's someone else's job. Well, it's actually everyone's job to prevent workplace violence. And one of those things is just making sure that we show up in a way that is professional, confident, competent, and non-confrontational will be one of the things that we can do to prevent it. One of the myths is that it can't happen here. Unless it's actually happened in your workplace, there's often a belief that it's going to happen somewhere else. And it really it can happen anywhere, because we're dealing with human beings, and anytime there's a human being hanging around, there's an opportunity for workplace violence to occur. Because workplace violence is not just about when someone gets hurt. The definition within the WorkSafe legislation is essentially any time that you feel that your safety is at jeopardy because of the behavior of someone else. So it's a really broad definition of when workplace violence takes place in a workplace setting or is connected to your workplace, because it can actually happen outside of the actual location that you're working. It's not something that happens in our industry. Well, I think I'm talking to an industry where that's not necessarily a myth, that's a reality. You understand that it could happen it does happen in your industry. It's caused by outsiders, people that have no connection to your organization. Statistically, that is one of the least likely people to sort of cause workplace violence. It will likely come from a customer or a client, could even come from a coworker, or there's a fourth category that we'll talk briefly about as well. And the last one is it's just a matter of luck. It's randomness. People believe workplace violence. That is incorrect. There is so much we can do to minimize the opportunity for workplace violence to occur. And Ingrid talked about some of them already, and I'm going to reinforce that hopefully forcefully today for you. So one of the resources that will be available to you is this sort of, I suppose, a one-pager that we put together, which covers a number of the things that we're going to be talking about today. So you'll see these repeated throughout our presentation, and then they'll be available to you. Might be a good refresher, could be a great tool to have at a staff meeting to go through some of these ideas. If you've got visuals often help, and hopefully you'll be reminded about what the presentation was about, plus you've got the recording as well. I want to start off though by recognizing that everyone is a human being, and that may sound very obvious, but with human frailties and human potential for us to see things differently than other human beings, we want to maintain that level of professionalism all the time. But sometimes we have bad days. We've got stuff going on in our own lives, or we get triggered by a word that someone says or something that someone does, and all of a sudden we jump into a situation where we're not making good decisions. I'm going to show you a slide that talks about fight or flight or freeze in a minute, and you've probably heard of that fight or flight response. And it's basically this in terms of the anger arousal cycle. When we are triggered, when our brain identifies a situation that it feels that could cause us harm, it does an amazingly important and powerful thing. It dumps a huge amount of adrenaline instantly into our major muscle groups, into our arm muscles so we can potentially fight for our lives, or our leg muscles so we can run for our lives. But at the very time that heart rate is going up, the blood is pumping and flowing into those major muscle groups, because it is in the form of blood, that adrenaline, it actually reduces the capacity of our brain to make really good decisions at that moment that we really need them to make good decisions. And so the quality of our judgment goes down at that very time that we need our quality of our judgment to be really, really good. So the way that we avoid fight or flight, because that's what we're trying to do here, the way that we avoid fight or flight is essentially to be prepared, to understand that if we're ready for something to potentially occur, we respond proactively, preventatively, and we don't get into situations. It's when we get surprised and frightened and shocked by things that we're not ready for. So a lot of the things that Ingrid was talking about, I'm going to reinforce, because it's really important to have those conversations with people, to train your staff, to make sure they feel as confident and as professional and as competent as possible, understanding the reason that we're going into and providing with people with information about why things are the way they are. So they've already got that language in their head. They've already got that style about them. Because one of the things that will reduce the potential for workplace violence to occur is if your staff every single time appear to be the most professional, the most confident, the most human, the most confident looking people, that they treat people the same way that they want to be treated, and that you as a supervisor, manager, as an employer reinforce that. Because, and that takes us to, this whole think, plan, act thing. We want to avoid the acting and then thinking afterwards. We want to plan this out ahead. And that's the point of the webinar, is to provide you with a sort of the idea of strategizing how we're going to deal with people before they even enter our establishment. What does the signage look like? What does the promotion on our website look like? What is the messaging that people are getting before they even walk in the door? And when they walk in the door, is that same messaging that they've seen on the website, they've seen outside on signs, or they've seen inside on signs, being messaged by the staff? Are the staff the sort of the symbol of safety? And so it starts with our sort of ability to do a risk assessment. One of the things that we want to make sure but we understand not only are you legally obliged to do a risk assessment in your workplace, I mean, that comes under your safety plan, right? You've got to have the policies in place. You've got to have a workplace violence prevention policy. And WorkSafe BC has tons of this information. I know on the website of BCMA, on the Hotel Association website, you can access this as well. But it's the policy, it's the risk assessment, it's the training. And then despite having all those things in place, actually, if something does occur, you've got to have that documented and an investigation occur to work out, okay, we're sorry this happened, but how can we help it? How can we mitigate it happening in the future? All of those are your legal responsibilities. But under the sort of the everyday risk assessing, we want to remember that things have a capacity to happen very, very quickly. It doesn't take more than just a snap in someone's ability to make sure, to maintain a calm demeanor for things to escalate. So this isn't a slow boil. Things can happen very, very quickly. And even though I may be some distance away from another person, I don't need to be an Olympic caliber athlete to cover enormous distances. All I need is motivation, which can happen to anyone. We know that when people are in groups, they behave very differently. The whole studies on pack mentality and group dynamics, people they absolutely will minimize and reduce their own accountability for their own behavior depending on how many people are around them. So dealing with a group of individuals as opposed to a solo customer, a solo client in your establishment is very different for the staff member. And we want to be appreciative of that and understand that, yes, they may be talking to one person, but the group may be feeding that person a sense of courage sometimes. And then when someone does something offside, the rest of the group now think that that's the sort of the standard. We often look at people and dismiss them maybe sometimes because we think that they're not likely to be a physical threat to us. And really the only thing that we cannot tell is what's going on inside their head. And that's the only thing that's really going to dictate whether they are going to be a physical or confrontational risk to us. So looking at someone is not going to be a guarantee that that person is not going to, looking at a person who doesn't appear to be, they could become a potential threat or risk to us. It's not a guarantee of that at all. And the demonstrated threat here, within the Criminal Code of Canada, the definition of weapon is anything that is capable of causing you harm or made or capable of causing you harm. So it's the glass, it's the bottle, which are not weapons in the true definition of them. I mean, it's not a knife or a bat or something, but it's these inanimate objects that people reduce their, again, their responsibility. If they start flying around, they can become very, very dangerous. So we want to make sure that we're understanding that in your entire establishment, there are tons of potential threats in the inanimate objects that lie around on the table and that the servers have with them at the time, or the staff in the hotels or the restaurants. So we want to make sure that we are aware of our surroundings and that we don't unnecessarily give people access to weapons in a moment of elevated stress. One of the slides I always like sharing about is this slide about the referee with the yellow card. If we think about the referee, and this talks about consequences, which we're going to talk about later on, consequences for non-compliance of a client or a customer. So the staff member has an opportunity to go up and talk to a particular person about a particular issue that they have noticed that the person is maybe not in compliance of a particular rule or policy that you have in place within your establishment. So the referee, and with their yellow card, points out an infraction to a player on the soccer pitch. And the point of that yellow card is to warn the player that they've actually breached the rules. They've actually crossed over that they've played outside the code of conduct, if you like. So that will be when a person in your establishment is doing something that is in non-compliance of the policies, of the posted policies that you've got in your establishment. The only discipline decision that a referee actually makes to a player is showing them the yellow card. The player, by deciding to foul again, by refusing to agree to the referee's warning, is the person that actually makes the decision about whether they leave the pitch on a red card. So when we're talking about conflict resolution in a few minutes, it's really important that the language that the staff use towards, and maybe even you as a manager or owner or supervisor, that you use gives the onus of what's going to happen next to the customer. It's their decision. And whatever they decide to do, you've already told them what the consequences of that decision are going to be. So all you're doing is follow throughing with the consequences if there's non-compliance. On the other hand, if the player who wants to play in a game of soccer doesn't want to get booted off the pitch, then they won't foul again. Then they will continue. Then they will be compliant with the rules. And that's one of the great sort of analogies. Ingrid talked about the importance of having signage. I'm a huge fan of signs. Why I'm a huge fan of signs is that when your staff members are asked to enforce a policy, enforce a compliance, the rules of your establishment, if they don't have signage that they can refer to, it will come across to the recipient of that information from the staff member's mouth as maybe being their standard that they're now implying. You need to support your staff with signage because that needs to be their sort of backup plan that they can refer to when someone is resistant to the information given to them verbally by the staff member. If you think about the Coast Mountain Bus Company, on the back, right behind the driver, there's a sign that says, "We have the right to refuse service to anyone and ask you to leave the bus if you're in non-compliance of these rules." And so it's not just the driver that's making up that. There's a sign there to support. So you've got reinforcing. One of the things that we really want your staff to be aware of, and you, as you're looking at your establishment, is what are you actually seeing? So there's a great science around being situationally aware. And you've heard that expression, you can't see the wood for the trees sometimes, or the forest for the trees. And it depends on what you're looking for. That depends on what you will see that is often right in front of you. There's a beautiful analogy or a philosophy that's called visual literacy. And it has really everything to do with safety. And it's about what are you looking for in your establishment? You are, there's that will to serve that Ingrid talked about, and everyone's wired in a customer service way. We want to provide the best possible experience for people coming into our workplace and enjoying the environment and the service and the quality of the experience there. And sometimes we can be so hyper-focused on providing that as the experience that we actually miss some warning signs about that may be relevant for our safety that are right in front of us. So one of the pictures that they use in visual literacy courses is this black and white photograph. And yes, is it a forest? Is it a field? And do you see the danger that's right lurking in front of you? And when you go back to the slide in its black and white format, you now can't not see the cheetah or the leopard. I'm sorry. So it's one of those things that once you've seen it, once you understand what you're looking for, you then see it everywhere. You'll then be alive to the fact that, oh my goodness, this is in my workplace. So if we go into, not that I want to make everyone paranoid here, but it's about understanding that from a safety point of view, if we do not see safety, which are safety risks and hazards that are pretty obvious because they show up in the human format, as far as we are concerned today, then we can be blind to a risk that we are putting our staff members in front of, or we are in front of. So it's about not being blind to potential risks. And always, please, understanding that know how to get out of a situation before you put yourself in a situation. If we think about to when we were flying around in airplanes, and hopefully we'll be doing that much more often later on in the future, but the flight attendant would stand at the front of the aircraft, and before the plane backs out of the gate at the airport, they would go through a routine talking about safety before the plane ever leaves the ground. And one of those safety speeches is all about have a look around you, not only in your plasticized card about the safety of this aircraft, but have a look around you and locate the nearest exit. And by the way, that might be right behind you, not in front of you. So it's the nearest exit, because and they do that then, not when we're flying around and then have an issue. On the back of every door in a hotel, there's that fire exit plan. I am one of those people. Thank you for doing this, by the way, the hoteliers with us, of putting that fire exit plan there. Because as you go to different facilities, they're all slightly different. Where the exits are, where the corridors are, and where the room is located on that corridor. So I'm one of those people that pays huge attention to that. So when we're putting staff into a situation in our establishments, we need to also remind them about how to get out of that situation if things go wrong very quickly, not having to think about it at the time when things go wrong, but before they go wrong. Because if we again go in knowing how to get out of a situation, we're likely to be much more confident and present ourselves differently than if we're sort of a nervous person not knowing how we're going to extract ourselves from a situation. A chap called Jeff Cooper, who's a retired US Marine Corps colonel, came up with this philosophy called the color code of awareness, and where he talks about being in the sort of defensive driving mode of that yellow piece here. And it's a great sort of analogy, because he talks about the white mode being a bit of a daydreaming mode where we're thinking of other things other than safety. But if we're really in defensive driving mode, then those of you that have taken an official defensive driving course will perhaps remember when you went out for a drive with the instructor asked you to verbally narrate out loud so that they could hear you, identify every single hazard as you're driving that car along. So you're picking out the how long the lights have been green when down the corridor. You're picking out what the car not in front of you is doing, but 6 in front of you is doing. You're looking out for the car behind you. You're looking out for the weather conditions, the road conditions, how fast the car is going. What is the speed limit on the road? Are there any school buses around? Are we going through playground zones? Are there any kids playing? All of these things you're looking out for, because as soon as you identify a possible risk to you, the brake lights suddenly go on in a car, a few in front of you, your foot comes off the gas, you hover over the brake. You go into this orange state of mind where you're completely alert. And if you practice defensive driving habits, every time you get behind the steering wheel of a car, you will never have an at-fault accident in your life, because you're always going to be prepared, and it's always going to be someone else's fault if they have an accident. So we want to adopt that defensive driving mode, being in that yellow state of mind with our staff, with you, as you go and deal with hazards, because in this form, the hazard has a pulse. They are a human being. And every time, I know you're in this business because you love humans and you hire people that love humans. And as a police officer for 35 years, I love humans as well. But sometimes those humans can be a little unpredictable. And if we recognize the warning signs of an unpredictable situation and where they could potentially occur, we become much more able to handle them. And the red state of mind is that one where we go from white to blind panic, basically, in that fight or flight, because we haven't been prepared, we haven't seen the warning signs, we haven't been looking for them, we got surprised. I'm going to share with you a philosophy called verbal judo, which was created by a chap called George Thompson a number of years ago. And in his training material, he talks about, in this conflict resolution program, the very first page says, empathy is the single most powerful word in the English language, because one of the things that I want us to remember throughout all of this is that trying to understand where a person is coming from, trying to see if a person is upset, ticked off, angry, frustrated, what is the reason? And maybe we will never understand the reason, but if we do our best to demonstrate that we want to understand the reason, often that's a great calming sort of effect for people. And that golden rule that I'm sure everyone in your organization subscribes to is always treat people like you would like to be treated in exactly the same situation. So that's something that needs to be reinforced, not just on when they join you and sign the contract of employment. It's something that needs to be reinforced. And when Ingrid talks about the training of your staff, that doesn't happen once. That has to happen almost every single day. They need to know that they've got your support, that you are there with them psychologically, even if you're not physically standing next to them. Because if I know that my boss has my back, if I know that the rules that I am talking to a client about or customer about, and about the perhaps non-compliance, that I understand where that's coming from, I'm likely to be a much more believable person. I'll be a much more confident sounding person, looking person. And that's one of the key things in trying to eliminate or at least mitigate the chance of workplace violence occurring. It doesn't happen. It rarely happens if I present myself in a confident, professional, competent way. At the end of the day, though, there's a number of things here which are going to be on this one pager that you have access to. There are 9 of them. We can't control the other person. The only thing we can actually control is our response to other people. So there are 9 sort of basic philosophies I want to remind you of, and these will feel very universal in terms of a universal truth, because these are that demonstration of empathy. When a person is demonstrating, even if a person says to me, it looks like you're really upset by this, that's an empathetic comment to me, because it acknowledges from their point of view that they've understood or recognized that I'm upset. They don't have to agree with me, which would be a sympathetic response, because likely I'm wrong and the staff member is absolutely correct. So, but just demonstrating a comment about how empathetic they can be to me is really important. When I'm stressed and I'm upset and I'm ticked off as a client or a customer, I'm not really in a great mental space to listen to long passages. I don't want you to read your policy document to me. I just need the highlight reel. I just need it laid out in ways that I can understand, a layperson can understand. I want your staff members to absolutely respect my personal space. I don't want them to be pushing into me to really drive home a message that they want to say to me, or they raise their voice and come close. They need to understand, so they need to respect my personal space. We have this in our sort of North American culture. We often have this 3-foot bubble around us that we don't like or don't want people that we don't know or don't invite to step that closely to us. So our staff need to understand they don't go too close to people in terms of breaching that personal bubble. And when we're further away from people, we get a better chance to observe their body language. And when we talk about the ways we communicate in a second, body language is absolutely key in understanding the importance of messages that people are sending. Allow me to vent. You know, it's often a cathartic experience that I have when I'm allowed to, really? If I'm, frustrated over something. And it may not be anything to do with the organization. It may be backstory that I've brought into the organization. I've got stuff going on in my life that just has, boiled up in that moment. So sometimes that a cathartic venting is actually really important. But at the same time, you've got to enforce reasonable limits. I cannot be venting by throwing stuff around and threatening people and being confrontational. I'm allowed to have a cathartic vent, but you need to be able to enforce the limits on that. Because your overarching goal, your legal requirement, is to provide your staff with a safe workplace, and allowing me to go off and have a big vent at their expense of their safety is not appropriate. You may be dealing with the same issue time and time again, or the staff member maybe. We want to support them in never overreacting. It may be the very first time that me as a customer or a client has had this particular experience, but if your staff member has dealt with 100 of me that day, and I'm just that person that tips them over the patient's area, then I'm going to be on the receiving end of inappropriate behavior from your staff member. So understanding what sort of, we talk a lot about psychological safety in the workplace, and understanding what sort of day I'm having, or your staff member is having, and supporting them to be the very best and safest version of themselves is really important. So sometimes maybe the staff member is in need of a break and being drawn away from humans. I've talked about not touching people. Please don't ever get into a situation where you have staff members touching clients and customers. The definition of an assault is the intentional application of force to the person of another without their consent. So it's actually an assault. And there may be some people that react really badly if a staff member put hands on someone else without their permission. So that's a no-go, please. And really, you're breaking that 3-foot rule, and I'm not really in a great place to, if I'm upset about something, I don't want a stranger, even though it's a friendly staff member, to put a sort of comforting arm around me to try and support and help me in a way. That's going to be a negative trigger for sure. And also, this is really easy to say, that I say, don't take stuff personally when people are yelling and screaming at you and calling you a whole bunch of names. That's it's really easy for me to say that, much harder for people to do. It will sound very personal, but the moment that you take this stuff personally, it will make the person less able to sort of try and resolve it. So 9 things here on a slide that I hope that make sense for you, and they're certainly on your one pager that you have access to later on. as we move towards our sort of conflict resolution piece, the communication, we communicate in 3 ways all the time through when we're doing face-to-face work here. Throughout the words that we use, the tone that we use, and our body language. And the studies that have been done for a number of years all support the fact that our body language speaks much more loudly to people than what we say in our words or the tone. But it also applies not only to what we interpret from other people saying, but what we say to people as staff members. So really reinforcing to staff members, be professional with your body language, be non-confrontational, be safe, but make sure that we don't send an unfortunate message that differs from the language that we're using with our actual words. Talking of words, here's a bunch of things that we should never actually say to people. We would not like it if a staff member in an organization said any of these to us. It would create that sort of negative reaction where someone yells, "Come here, calm down. What do you want me to do about it? I'm not going to say this again." I mean, they all are really bad things to say. So when we in our world of COVID safety, what our healthcare leaders are telling us, they're telling us what to do, and they're absolutely telling us what not to do as well. So in our way of training our staff, we've got to tell people what to do and also what not to do as well. This is the verbal judo piece that I wanted to share with you. It's on your one-pager as well that you have access to, but essentially, this is the slide that you can take a photograph of with your phone if you like. But George Thompson was a psychologist that is no longer with us, but a number of years ago, he developed a verbal de-escalation system that in various ways has been used in law enforcement and security training internationally. The 3 first thing, and it's a 5-step program. We hope you never get past the first dot, but then you might get to the second dot or the third dot. And the 4th and the 5th dots are different colors because they're more sort of, okay, now what are we going to do about this if we haven't got compliance? So very quickly, presence. This is showing up, this is reminding staff members that we send an immediate message by how we show up in people's lives. You know, when you meet someone for the very first time, think about how long it takes you to form an opinion about that person if you're just meeting them with no background information about who they are, no reference material. It takes you a second for you to make up your mind about that person. And first impressions, we know, are very, very hard to change. So let's make that first impression be the best it can possibly be. So always have your staff being professional, always have your staff feeling confident and competent, and being human. And sometimes when we show up as that person, often we set ourselves up for success in resolving things with an individual. And we may not even have to address the behavior because all of a sudden we sort of have settled down. If we have to address the behavior verbally, make sure you know what's going to come out of their mouth. Make sure they know what they're going to say. Don't fumble for the right words. Have a script in their heads about what it is you're pointing out to the person, and particularly why the rule or the policy or the procedure is in place. I need to know, if I'm on the receiving end of this, I want that person to tell me the reason that I need to behave in a certain way. I don't want to be told it's a policy. I don't want to be told it's a safety issue. I don't want to be told because I told you to. I want them to know and be able to describe to me why I need to wear a mask, why I need to socially distance. And you think that everyone should know this, but sometimes they actually need to be reminded verbally by someone in a position of not necessarily authority, or your staff member is, but a person that sounds as though they know what they're doing, sounds confident in their job. And that's the most important thing that you need to provide in terms of training for your staff, so they can be that best advocate for safety in your organization and be as professional and be that sort of walking billboard for safety. The person may not like the information, but if I can tell you, if I'm given the information in a calm, professional way, and I understand it, then I may comply at that stage. So you may never get more than stage 2. But if I told the person why I need compliance, why they need to behave, and also I need to be in that conversation, you need to be curious about, is there especially about mask wearing, is there a prohibited human rights reason that they are not wearing a mask? Is there a health issue that they are not wearing a mask? because those are sort of two environmental, two pieces where the mask restriction is sort of not applied. But if that does not apply, the third option is going to be provide options, which is basically going and getting a supervisor or a manager. And one of those, you need to be able to, the staff member needs to feel comfortable and confident saying, if you don't get compliance at this level, then you know what, come and get me. Because that's my job as a manager, as a supervisor, to come and deal with that individual. The staff member is not the person, that the frontline staff member is not the person to be, escorting the person out the door. It's or having consequences. They're the messenger, for trying to get compliance with a bit of information. If that doesn't work, retreat, come and get the supervisor and the manager, and hopefully. And that's when you need that consistent messaging. The message is delivered in the same way, but coming from a supervisor or manager, it's often interpreted differently by the person who receives it. And if that does not work, then a great question for someone at the supervisory, managerial, or employer level to ask the person, is there anything I can do or say to get your cooperation? Because you never know, the answer to that question might just be something really simple that you can say to a person that gets them to comply. But at the same time, it should be, is there anything I can do or say to get your cooperation? Because if there's not, you're leaving me no alternative but to ask you to leave, refuse your service, I'm going to call the police. Whatever that red card consequence is going to be at that stage, that's when you say that. Leaving it up to the individual to decide on whether they get to stay on the pitch and play as a soccer player or whether they're going to leave on a red card. Really simple to share this, I hope. And it's reinforced in our training as well, in that one pager. Almost the very last slide we've got for you is the importance of reinforcing those active listening skills. So one of those things, these are the four categories of active listening that need to be reinforced. Active listening is one of the biggest ways that we can actually help an individual calm and settle down. Listening to them, please. Displaying empathy, asking questions to get a better understanding of what the person's upset about, because you may remember in British Columbia a number of years ago, there was a radio show on CKNW that used to have the phrase at the end, and now for the rest of the story. We need to be curious about what the rest of the story is behind this person's level of stress and anxiety is. And so asking relevant questions to get a better understanding of why the person is upset. But the most important part to demonstrate that I have been listening to you is for me to be able to paraphrase back to you in my own words what it is you've been saying. Because one of the biggest things in conflict resolution, in de-escalating people from an elevated level of anxiety, is for staff members or you as supervisors or managers to be able to demonstrate not only that they heard me, but they understood me. And this is one of the biggest things that we can share with people. So with that, there's another piece I want to ask you as well here. And I'm sure you've done this. We were talking briefly earlier on about the Bar Watch program, and that's certainly licensed premises in Vancouver have, and we in New Westminster sort of borrowed the framework of that. And I know it's been duplicated in many different industries. About making a positive connection upfront with your local law enforcement agency to bring them into the conversation about providing staff with safety tips and safety perspective. Because often by them understanding what sort of things your staff are going through, they're able to help you sort of construct a part of that safety plan and part of how they show up different with the customers and clients that are potentially non-compliant. So build those proactive relationships. This is all about workplace violence prevention, not how to, yes, a little bit of how to respond afterwards. But if we can, part of that myth about it's only a matter of luck, some of this stuff we can really reduce that luck and almost eliminate it by being very, very proactive ahead of time. Where are we going here? So a quick recap on the sort of highlight reel here. You have a legal responsibility to provide a safe workplace for your staff. WorkSafe BC through Hotel Association's website or on WorkSafe website itself has tons of information about to reinforce this. The 4 things that you have a responsibility to do: create policies, do risk assessments, do training, and then investigations of situations that have actually occurred, which is about documenting incidents if you can't avoid them happening. Clearly explain the rules and the reasons for them to your patrons and your staff. It's about not just about signage, but about reinforcing that through constant narratives and training opportunities with your staff to remind them of the importance of it. Train and support your staff. Man, if I've got my boss, if I've got my supervisor or manager that is right there in spirit, who says, any problems, Phil, come and get me, I'm likely at that moment to actually have less need for that person, because I will show up differently to the person in front of me. Remind your staff that the only thing they have control over is how they choose to respond. No one makes you do anything. And so we have the opportunity of choosing our response to people. The verbal judo technique is absolutely key, and active listening is key. So I'm going to briefly pause here. We had some questions that came in, lots of questions, thank you very much. So I'm just going to sort of, we went through the questions and am I doing okay for time, anyone? Someone's going to tell me.
I think we have about 10 more minutes, Phil. So I'd just like to remind those people that are on the webinar, if you have a question to submit, use the chat function. Until we see a couple of questions there in the chat function, Phil, why don't you go and, answer the ones we have in the slide deck.
Excellent, thank you, I will do that. And there may well be tons of questions afterwards, but so you've got resources at the very end to access the answers for that. So one of the themes of questions that we had was, what are the current reasons that create violent situations? And this is it's an easy and a hard one to answer. If you pull into effect the risk factors for workplace violence, working directly with the public, number one. And they're not in any particular order, but that the public is, so anytime we're public facing, there's always that potential, because you're working with humans who represent today our hazard. Handling money or valuables, carrying out inspection or enforcement duties, providing a service, care, advice, or education, so healthcare and sort of teach education staff, working with unstable or volatile or unpredictable people, which, when we think about COVID and how that creates a lot of anxiety in us, this might be broad in that brush. Working in premises where alcohol is served. And again, this is really, so it applies to just about every one of the people on this call, I'm sure. Working alone or in small numbers. Man, when we work in sort of isolation, we feel very vulnerable sometimes. So making sure that we've addressed that working alone or in isolation legislation that we're required to do for our staff safety is really important. Having a mobile workplace and working during hours of intense organizational change or even job insecurity. So any of those are sort of identified as potential reasons that can create the volatility for violence to occur. One of the questions, one of the themes, at what point in a conflict can self-defense be employed, and what restrictions should you bear in mind? Wow, when I read this one, I was thinking, okay, I better book overnight accommodation, because this 1 hour webinar is going to be like about a week long. The Section 34 of the Criminal Code of Canada, which deals with self-defense, was changed back in 2012 as a result of there was a piece of legislation through the Parliament that changed it. And essentially, it really depends. I am not going to be an advocate at all of putting hands on people in any situation, just because the rationale, one of the reasons that a person is not guilty of an offense of assault, which would be the self-defense, is that the act committed is reasonable in the circumstances. And man, that definition, that prying apart that reasonableness of someone being physically aggressive to someone else, even in a defensive way, because they are fearing their own safety or the safety of someone else, is so subject to interpretation. And it will be subject to interpretation by the courts, not necessarily in the moment of time when it occurs. So it's really important that, and that's one of those reasons that you should have that proactive contact with the police department or the RCMP detachment to have them come and talk about what that looks like and feels like for your staff, so that they have that that understanding. So it's a really, if it depends, a type of answer, and not one that I can deal with right here, but just know that there is no black and white answer to that question, and you need to have that conversation somewhere else for sure. Which occupational groups tend to be the most at risk from workplace violence? Well, it's again, alcohol, money, delivery of services and passengers, having a mobile workplace. Yeah, any of the ones that actually I talked about before. So when we're dealing with completely unknown people, when you've got zero, interestingly enough, in the world of workplace violence, one of those places that actually has high degrees of incidence are libraries, because they have zero barrier to entry, like many of your organizations. You want people to come in. And so when you want people to come in, part of that want people to come in, that blanket open door policy, is you invite a whole bunch of risks into your workplace. So when there's no screening going on, that's one of those occupational groups that tend to have an elevated level of risk here. So why we need to pay attention. Some guidance for the...
Sorry, it's Ingrid. We do have a question here in our live chat.
Thank you.
That I thought would be good. I'm curious about your take on patrons with mental health issues, including dementia, who may not understand the interactions with staff, especially given recent events with police brutality. What other training or options are available? And Krista, I'm not sure whether, go-to, I know that you do quite a bit of training, or Phil, which one of you would like to answer that question?
Well, I'm happy to, Krista?
No, go ahead, Phil.
I think it's a great question, so thank you for the source of that. We are not able to provide people with an elevated level of training that's going to get them to diagnose and identify people that are suffering with a mental illness. What I think we can say is that there is a category of members of the public that show up in what we call an emotionally disturbed state, where there may be elevated levels of anxiety or behavior that is identified by a person that is not necessarily predictable. And so we want to trust our spidey sense. Our sixth sense is a really great safety blanket. And so if we have an individual that is showing up and we believe them to have struggling with a mental illness of some kind, we need to have lots of patience. As a staff member, we need to give time to that interaction. You're not being able to hurry it through. Maybe there's something that we can help the person with. So maybe being curious about the person and finding out if there's something that we can provide them at zero sort of risk to ourselves. Maybe it's even making a phone call to someone that's a support person that they have, someone else that is able to come and assist them, because maybe, from a dementia point of view, that's one of the key things with missing people. They wander off and are lost and don't know where to go. So they come into a place that has an open door, your opportunity there. And so maybe they end up in your establishment and are just lost, but they present themselves in a very unpredictable way. But having said that, as long as the staff member is primarily focused about their safety and keeping distance and maybe making sure that we can get other resources there, such as a supervisor or manager to assist with an elevated level of skill level perhaps, then that would be great.
Thank you, Phil. We have about 2 minutes left. So I have a sense that this question that you have on the screen now would be a really great one to end on before we say our adieu. But I know that this circumstance is in many, many businesses. So Phil, would you like to comment on this one, or potentially Krista?
I'm happy to take this on. And then have Krista either support or say, don't listen to that guy. One of the things I would say to this is that when we have younger supervisors and managers that show up, 100 years ago, when I was a police officer in London, I was a junior, younger sergeant that reduced the average age in my shift by about 40 years. 3 things I would say to people: be confident in their own abilities, first of all. Be open to feedback about how they're showing up, with their staff members and how they're showing up in their organization. So be willing to learn and be open-minded about the fact that we don't know everything. But I think that if we show up as willing students of being better supervisors, asking people for their ideas about how the world works in that particular situation, and then wanting to learn, I think those are great qualities for younger supervisors and managers.
Yeah, and if I could just add, I think you captured those 3 points, Phil, really great. And as a business who's hiring those managers and supervisors, you've chosen them for a reason amongst all their peers and cohorts, and they have demonstrated, some skills and abilities and qualities that put them in that position to be effective. And so as a supervisor, you can remind them and help, build that confidence with them. So when they get into tough situations, that they do know that they're there for a reason.
Yeah, great comment, Krista. Recognizing and respecting everybody's time today. This was, we could have done a 2-hour presentation very easily. The context and content is so relevant right now, and I'd just like to thank Phil for you stepping forward and giving us a presentation today, and Krista and Arun for your long-term commitment to support the industry and the training that we all need. I think it's been a very insightful and very wise presentation to be thinking and listening, and as I said previously, we will make the webinar available. If there are questions that you're looking for answers for, please don't be shy. Go ahead and contact any of us that are here on this contact page. We're here to support you in the long run. And I know that, we're just rounding the corner to end our summer, but my goodness, we've got a long way to go before we come the other side of the pandemic. And, our hope for all of you is that you have successful as possible years this year, and we're continuing to be here to support you. So do reach out, and thank you very much for your time today. And we have lots of really, really great comments here of thanks. So I think very valuable. Phil, again, thank you very much for your expertise and sharing that with our industry today.
Well, you're very welcome. Thank you. I'm happy to sort of be a resource and a sounding board, but this is a great slide to end on, I think, where they've got tons of resource locations where they can reach out. So I'm hoping that I was able to provide a sort of an overview of staff safety strategies and responsibilities, and hopefully that resonated with the audience.
Great. Well, it certainly appears to have. So thank you.